This is why it is so important to fill your freshwater tank when you arrive at a campground, even if you plan on using the pressurized city water connection. Well, it finally broke. I guess I can't complain. It's been 8 years, but now we have no water in the RV. These are easy to replace, but there's probably a little bit more work to it than you think. The wet bay fitting that threads onto the water hose snapped off. So today I'm going to show you not only how to replace this, but more importantly, some rarely mentioned supplies to keep with you and some other ways to get water in your RV if you can't replace this on the road. Now, yours may not have broken yet, but if it does, it's good to be prepared and know how to fix this quickly. Without this, you can't use your pressurized city water connection. You could still use your freshwater tank and water pump until you get it fixed, but that's only if you have a gravity fill for your freshwater tank. Some RV manufacturers are not installing gravity fills anymore, and if you don't have one, the only way to get water into your fresh tank is through the hose connection at the wet bay. First, let's relieve the pressure in the plumbing. With the water pump off, open your low point drains. You can also do this at a faucet if you don't have valves on your low points, and be patient until there is no water pressure left in the lines. Next, switch the wet bay valve or valves over to the city water. Push this check valve to relieve any pressure that may be in there. Once that's done, switch the valve or valves over to the fresh tank fill and open the check valve again. Now, how much water you see come out of this check valve is going to depend on how your plumbing system is designed, but we want to relieve as much pressure as possible in as many places as possible when working on the plumbing lines. There's a 110 volt outlet here, so let's disconnect our shore power, and pulling the battery disconnect only stops the power from going out. There is still power coming into this switch, so let's also disconnect the 12 volt battery. Now we can remove the fitting. After removing the mounting screws, you'll see what I mean about the additional work that I mentioned earlier. You may or may not be able to pull this fitting out far enough to disconnect it. This is going to depend on how your RV is plumbed. Mine's not coming out, so unfortunately we're gonna have to access this fitting from behind the wet bay panel. The screws here are just standard Phillips head, but it's a good idea to take a look at these now on your RV and make sure you have the correct bit to remove them on the road. This is what the back of a simple wet bay panel looks like, and you know, this is why I'm not a fan of complex wet bays like the Nautilus panels. They are a total mess. A lot more lines and fittings means more potential for leaks. Sometimes simple is just better, especially on days like today. Our fitting is back here, and you should be able to easily remove this by hand. Notice there is no Teflon tape on this fitting. It seals at the end of the fitting, just like a garden hose, so no Teflon tape is needed. I always like to sit the parts next to each other to make sure they are exactly the same, and now we can install the new fitting. Next, you'll just want to hand tighten the nut on the new fitting. You'll eventually get to a point where the fitting is going to start spinning, so go ahead and install your mounting screws, and then finish tightening down the nut by hand. Don't put a wrench on this, guys, at least not yet. We're going to test this out before we wrap everything up. Now, this is important. These come with a debris filter. Make sure it's installed now. The inside channel on this fitting is too deep for male fittings to properly seal without this additional debris filter. Ask me how I know. I refuse to charge our viewers to watch any of our videos. They're all free for everyone to watch. Our channel sponsors make this content possible, so I'd like to thank today's video sponsor. RV Snap Pads have become one of the most popular RV products over the last few years, and now they're available for travel trailers. Snapjacks simply replace the metal foot of your scissor jack, giving your stabilizers up to 274% more surface area, and that means more stability and less sinkage into soft ground. Made from recycled tire rubber, they provide better grip than a metal foot, especially on loose and uneven ground. Snapjacks protect not only your RV landing gear, but prevent scratching, gouging, and rust staining to your driveway or campsite pad. Use the link below and get 10% off your RV Snapjack order. Before we put this panel cover back on, let's connect our elbow and water hose to test it out. To do this, you'll want to be switched over to city water. That will pressurize this line. The line won't pressurize on the tank fill setting. Now, before turning on the water, confirm you have your pressure regulator connected, especially if you are doing this repair at home. Turn on the water and spend about 5 minutes at the panel checking for leaks in both the front and the rear of the panel. If you have a leak somewhere, you'll just need to make some adjustments, but once you're dry, you can go ahead and reinstall your panel cover. Some of you might be wondering, what is the deal with this black hose extension? So instead of constantly connecting and disconnecting my hose here, which is a tight area to begin with, and you're putting pressure on this fitting every time you connect, I leave this 3-foot hose permanently connected, drop it through the hatch, and connect it to my water hose with a quick connect fitting. It's just easier, it saves time during setup and teardown, and then I just tuck it back here when we're not RVing. So the big question is, what can you do to prevent this fitting from breaking? Well, it's plastic, it's cheap, and there's potential for it to break every time you touch it.
That's what she said.
This is why it is so important to fill your freshwater tank when you arrive at a campground, even if you plan on using the pressurized city water connection. If this breaks, you have fresh water available to you from your tank until you can get this replaced. Another scenario, if the campground is on a well and it loses power, again, you have fresh water in your tank. Now, I bought this plastic backup a while ago knowing it would probably break at some point. Since then, they have also released brass fittings if you want to get ahead of the game and upgrade to something stronger. I'll put some links below. However, you can minimize the constant pressure and contact this fitting sees a couple different ways. You can connect a 90 or 45 degree elbow on your wet bay to relieve some of the downward pressure you get when just straight connecting a hose. Also, you can add a small hose extension like I did on the elbow. Connecting the hose under the RV means you are never directly handling this fitting. So what happens if this fitting breaks while you're on the road? Best case scenario, you have a spare fitting and all the tools you need to replace the fitting. It will probably take you maybe 30 minutes tops to replace this fitting, but that is dependent on how much stuff you have to move to access the back of the panel. If you don't have a spare fitting, there's a couple different ways to get water in your RV until you get this replaced, and that leads us to the second best case scenario. You don't have a spare fitting, but you do have a gravity fill to your fresh tank. You'll need to use that until you get this fitting replaced. You can cut a foot or two off the female end of an old hose and keep this with you at all times. This will allow you to connect the hose and drop the cut end into the gravity fill. Why manufacturers don't put a garden hose thread on the gravity fills for freshwater tanks, I have no idea, but that's definitely a topic for a future video. And while on the subject of RV plumbing, I'd also recommend picking up a good PEX crimper along with some extra crimps. The most common size of PEX hose used in an RV is 1/2 inch, but it won't hurt to confirm this on your RV. A few feet of PEX hose and a hose cutter can be invaluable tools if you should find a leak. Water leaks in an RV should be addressed immediately. If they're not, they can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time. Something else I always keep spares of are these hose gaskets and debris filters. These may get so compressed that they don't maintain a watertight seal. Having these tools while you're on the road won't delay those repairs, and you don't have to worry about not having water on your trip. You don't have a spare fitting, you don't have a gravity fill on your freshwater tank, there's a couple other ways to get water into the system. First, you can disconnect the water line going from the fresh tank to the water pump, and adding water here will get water in your tank. You can also technically connect your hose to the cold water low point drain in a pinch to get pressurized water into the plumbing lines. You're going to need additional fittings to use both of these methods, and remember, depending on where you are, there might not be a hardware store close. Just remember, there is no check valve preventing water from backflowing from the RV to the water source like there is in the fitting, so it would probably be a good idea to add one. The moral of the story is, for $17, this is probably a part you want to keep as a spare in your RV. Links to everything in this video are down below in the video description. If you want to see more videos like this, I hope you consider subscribing, and we'll see you soon.